want to go back and review things that we talked about during the webinars. So that's the plan for today, as well as a summary of all the training materials. So let's go ahead and get started with today's training. And then just feel free to follow along with me as I'm walking through this stuff, either just looking at my screen or, if you can, I'm not sure how many screens you guys have, but if you can, it will be best to actually do the things that I'm doing on my screen as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just dig in and log into AP. As you guys know, the best browser to use is Internet Explorer. Firefox is okay as well, but Chrome is definitely not very functional, so I would not recommend Chrome. I have a shortcut here on in my browser, but just in case you don't, it's just adaptiveplanning.com/login. The information I'm going to be demoing on screen, I'll be doing that using our test DOO user, and we have some dummy data input for Washington Heights Elementary School. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in. Okay, so when you log in, you might get this screen, the announcements and adaptive planning. If you don't want to see this, there's a little do not show this message again box down here that you can click and then just continue to my start page. So if you get that, you can get rid of it. The first screen that most of you guys are going to come to is the Reports tab. That's most of your home screens. Most of you guys, actually all of you guys, should be familiar with that tab, so I'm not going to spend too much time on what's all in there, but we will come back to that a little bit later when we talk about reviewing your budget. Let me just walk through briefly what the other tabs contain. So the first tab is the Dashboard tab. This is where you would view reports in graphical format. We have not created said reports yet, but this is something that we're hoping to roll out a little bit later in the year. But that's where this would be. The Workflow tab is where the submission, approval, and/or rejection of budgets takes place. We're not going to discuss that today, but the Word document discusses that. And again, as I mentioned, the second webinar set is going to talk a little bit more about that. But this is basically where you could see your budget as it moves through the approval process. The Sheets tab is where we're going to play most of today. So this is where all of your budget input will take place. So if everybody could just click on the Sheets tabs for me. And if it's not already selected, go ahead and click on Overview over in the far left. And your screen should look similar to mine. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on this sheet. So in the upper right corner, see if I can utilize this WebEx stuff here. You're going to see, oh, look at that. You're going to see a version drop-down and a level drop-down. So the version drop-down, I will harp on this throughout the budgeting training session. This should always, always, always read Budget 2013-2014 active. Always. So you always want to continue to check that. It should be your default version, but just it does not hurt to continue to confirm that. Below that, you'll see this level drop-down, and this tells you what level you're working at. So if we click on this, you'll basically see which levels, aka cost centers or teams, if you're KTC, that you have access to. The one that is at the top, so the level that begins with KIP, we're going to refer to that one as the roll-up level throughout our budget training. And I'll talk about this later more, but no data input should be taking place at this level. It's just for roll-up purposes. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Okay, so that's a level drop-down. And then if we scoot over to the left side of the screen, you'll see a list of all the sheets that you have access to. There's a list along the left here, and then the same list is repeated along the top right underneath the Sheets tab. So all DOOs are going to have access to the same 5 sheets listed here, and then principals will also see an extra sheet. So let me just run through these briefly. The budget input non-personnel discretionary sheet is where you're going to input most of your non-personnel discretionary items. So we'll basically play on this sheet most of the training today. The tech assumption sheet is where you will update and input your tech budget. The next two revenue and expenditures and rev and expense cube sheet. They're more for non-discretionary and summary data, so we've put some formulas in here. You can ignore these for budgeting purposes. And then the locals tab is where you can, if you wanted to, create some program-specific assumptions. This is a little bit more of an advanced feature, so if you think that you might be interested in that, and you'll have a better idea of where you might use that as we walk through the training, you can just reach out to me directly, and I can work with you on that one. And then, as I mentioned, principals will also see another sheet called Budget Input Personnel Discretionary, and that is where they will update their personnel assumptions. So, as I mentioned before, the non-personnel discretionary tab is where the majority of your budget input will take place. So this is what I'm going to discuss next. And I'm just going to take a second really quick to see if anybody has any questions on just this brief overview that we talked about so far. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move on. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and click on the Budget Input Non-Personnel Discretionary tab. I feel like lately AP has been taking longer and longer to load, and I think that's because so many of us are using it, which is good. It's a good thing. Okay, so the first thing that we want to check, again, is that we're in the correct version. So in the upper right, I want to make sure that the version reads Budget 2013-2014 Active. The next thing I want to talk about is the level dropdown. So as I mentioned on the prior screen, no data input is going to take place at this roll-up level. And remember, the roll-up level is the one that begins with KIP. So let's just go ahead and select a lower level, because that's where all of your data input will take place. So I'm just going to select the elementary general level. If you guys are walking with me on your login, go ahead and select whatever your general level is. All right. So the next thing we want to do is make sure that we're reviewing the right time periods that we want to. Your screen probably does not look like mine right now. You probably have different columns here and different time frames. So to fix that, we're going to left-click anywhere in the sheet, and then go down all the way to the bottom and click Show and Hide. This is going to bring up a new window, and here you can select which time periods you want to view. So I've already selected mine here. I think, if you're a school that has been in existence for a little while, it probably makes sense for you to show FY12 annual data, FY13 annual data, and at the very least, you have to show months for FY 2014 because adaptive planning requires that we budget by month. So go ahead and set up your view however you want to see it. You can play with this more. And the last thing I'll say before we click OK is make sure that this suppress rows if all zeros are blank is not checked. We don't want to check that. And we'll click OK. So if you change anything on that little box, the screen should refresh automatically. And the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and save this screen. Saving it basically means that the next time you go into the sheet, the view will already be set up the way that it is right now, so you don't have to go and right-click and show hide all over again. All right, so that's setting up our view. You'll also notice here on the far left, the activity column. This is where we will budget by activity, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then after the activity column will be, the time frames that you indicated. So next I'm just going to scroll through the structure of this sheet. So basically walking through all the accounts on the left-hand side. This is very similar to how your SOA reports look. So the first section is enrollment. Then you have your sped enrollment broken down by type. Headcount is next. You'll notice in the budget and then in the latest version of the SOAs is we decided to break out full-time headcount and also full-time allocated headcount. In the past, we haven't done that before, but I think it makes sense to do that. Normally you would see like your full-time headcount would be 32.5, and you're like, what is this 0.5 thing? Like, I don't get that. But it was because you had some allocated employees in there. So this way, I think it makes more sense to break it out so you can see what's what. The next section is your non-discretionary personnel expenses. This is all your salaries, bonuses, stipends, and benefits. Next is going to be your discretionary expenses, starting with the personnel section. So all your discretionary stipends, etc. And then we get to the non-personnel discretionary stuff, consultants, etc. We're just going to keep scrolling down. This should look very similar to how your SOAs look. So beneath all of your expenses, we'll see discretionary revenue, a section for adjustments, and then some per pupil calculations. So that's sort of the column overview of the sheet. As I was scrolling through, you'll notice that some of these cells have a white background and some of them have a gray background. So anything with a white background is going to be editable, and anything that has a gray background is not editable. So for example, we see that enrollment here has a white background, but this salary row here does not, because this is something that is driven from another sheet and it's read-only. The one sort of semi-exception to that is the far right column, which is the FY14 column. That's like, it's not white and it's not really gray, it's kind of like purplish. So I call that semi-editable, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. The other thing you might notice is that you see some cells with a little purple triangle in the bottom corner. That indicates that there's a formula in that cell. So SPED is probably the first one that you see. If you click on that cell, you'll see what the formula means. We won't go into that, but this is basically just taking your SPED enrollment proportions from last year and applying them to this year's enrollment. So there's a formula in this SPED cell, but it also has a white background. So you can overwrite this if you would like to. Just a few more notes on cell formats. Anything with a green font, you guys will probably see more green on your screen than I do, means that that's actual data. Anything with a blue font, which we'll see a little bit later, is unsaved data. If you see a little red triangle in the cell, that means that there's a note attached to the cell. And we're going to also talk about that in a little bit. All right, let me just check for any questions. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how you actually input data into this sheet. So the simplest way to do that, and I'm just going to scroll down. Another thing you can do is you can collapse some of this stuff if you don't want to see it. So I'm just going to collapse all my non-discretionary personnel expenditures so that the sheet becomes a little bit more user-friendly for me. All right. So the simplest way to type data into the sheet is just to type it in. So these sheets behave very similar to Excel spreadsheets with some notable differences, but they're very similar. So if I just want to type in 2,500 in August for office supplies, that's the easiest way to do it. Another way to input data quickly is to copy forward. So for postage, for example, if I know that we spend about $50 a month in postage and it's every month, I'm going to type in 50 in that cell, click back in the cell, right-click, select copy forward, and then copy to end. So this way I don't have to type in 50 in each of these cells. It just copies it all the way to the end of the year. You'll also notice that now we're starting to see some blue font, which means that this data is unsaved. A third way to enter data in a cell is breaking back an annual amount. So this is where we're going to talk about how the FY 2014 column is sort of semi-editable. And I'll just show you an example of this. It's sort of the best way to explain it. If I know what my annual amount for paper is and I just want to break it back across the year, I'm going to go over to the FY 2014 column, type in that number, so maybe it's $5,000. After I hit enter, a new window is going to pop up. And I have a few options here, and I'll talk about two of these. So if I just want to break it back evenly across the month, I'm going to select break back evenly, click apply, and it has the effect of basically dividing that 5,000 by 12 and entering that data into each individual cell. So that's another quick way to enter data. But there were some other options there if you noticed. So if I let me just go to another thing here. So if I were to break it back proportionally, actually, sorry, let me regroup a little bit here. Let's say that I have membership and subscriptions, and I know that I have a certain amount every quarter. So I'm just having 500 in September, 500 in December, 500 in March, and 500 in June. So I input that data, but later I decide, actually, like our memberships and subscriptions, it's not really 2,000, it's going to be 2,500, but the timing of these expenses are going to be the exact same. I'm going to go back to the FY 2014 column, type in the new annual amount, and choose break back proportionally. And this time it's basically going to look at the data that's already there and break it back proportionally using that data. So now you see that there's still every quarter I have that data, but now the annual amount is updated, and it broke it back proportionally based on the data that was already there. So that might be handy if you need to update annual amounts, but you don't want to have to go in and retype your numbers in individual cells if you were to budget by month. The other option that we saw there was break back proportionally using the prior year. You can also do that. If you know that your spending is going to trend the same way that it trended this year, next year, you can break it back proportionally using the prior year. So those are just a few of the sort of basic ways to input data into cells. I'm just going to take a quick 2-second break to see if anybody has any questions. I'm going to unmute you guys real quick. So are you guys all with me and good and all that makes sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, back to meeting. Okay. So a few more notes on data input. Let's see. So I mentioned that this blue font means that that's unsaved data. If I were to try to navigate away from this page, so say, okay, I'm done inputting all my data in elementary general. Now I want to go and input some data in elementary K. If there's blue font here and there's unsaved data, it's going to give you this pop-up that says, wait a second, you have some unsaved changes. Do you really want to leave this page, or do you want to stay here and save it? This is just sort of a backup if that the system sort of has employed. I would not recommend that you guys depend on this backup, just because browsers crash. The system has crashed on me before. Computers crash. So definitely, save your work and save it often. That is something that I will. I can't really reiterate that enough. I've spent the last year basically working in this system, and I have gotten burned before on not saving my data. So please save and save often. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is adding a note to a cell. So this is kind of a cool feature. If you want to add a note to a cell, so maybe like if your DOO is doing like a first draft of your budget, and they want to send you some notes so that when you're looking at it, you see what they were thinking. So say this office supplies number, say I'm a DOO. I input this office supplies number, but I'm not really sure, if this is the right number, or if we want to increase it, etc. So I want to add a note so that my principal sees it when she or he is looking through it. I'm going to right-click in the office supplies cell and go to Add Note, and then just type in my note. We recommend that you add your formulas to it beforehand and you'll sort of see why. So we'll say this is about what we spent last year. So do we want to reduce at all? After I'm done typing in my note, I'm just going to click anywhere off of the cell. And now you see that there's a little red triangle here, which means that there's a note in this cell. If you hover over the red triangle, you'll see the note. And it'll show you when it was last updated, by who, and on what date. And if I want to edit this note, I'm going to right-click again and select Edit Note. So say now maybe I'm the principal, right? I'll say no, let's just keep this the same. And again, I'm just going to click off of it. So this note basically, it travels with the data. There we go. It travels with the data, and it's sort of, it's like a live note. So you can, I mean, you can write paragraphs in here if you wanted to. But I think it's a really good way to sort of communicate with other people who are looking at the same data without having to like be in the same room with them at the time. Just some other quick comments on notes. This note is going to travel with the data. So anyone who has access to this data will have access to this note. However, the indicators will not necessarily travel with the data in the same way. So let me just explain what I mean. So we just typed that note in here. So say I'm reviewing my budget, and I'm doing that at the roll-up level, which is probably where I want to do it. Let's go ahead and save my changes. See, I always get caught up on that saving stuff. All right. So say I'm reviewing my data at the roll-up level. This is where we input that note, the same cell here. Notice that there's no red triangle here, so I can't actually tell that there's a note here unless I drill down into this cell. This is just a note that we wanted to let you guys, make sure you guys are aware of as you're reviewing your budgets. The way that I could see this note is if I right-click here and selected Explore Cell. Oh. I see that it's all in Elementary General. I drill down into that, and now I see the note here. So that's the only way from a higher level that you can actually see that note. The note travels with the cell, but the indicator does not. So just as an FYI. Just go back into this general level. Here you see the indicator. All right. One more quick thing on notes. Let me just, someone asked us during the PD training Friday, and I was able to figure it out today. So he was like, so if we can't see the indicators on the roll-up tab, like, is there a way that I can see like all of my notes in one place? And the answer is yes. And it's back on this overview tab. So I'm going to go here, but I'm going to hold down Control first and then click on the overview tab, which means that it opens up in another spreadsheet. I use this all the time so that I don't have to, it's easy to switch back and forth between data. So hold down Control, click Overview. It opens it up in a new tab. And here, you can search cell notes. And if I just want to see all of my notes, I'm not going to type in any criteria. I'm just going to click Search, and we should see that note pop up, and we do. So this is the same note that we just entered right now. So this is an easy way to see all of your notes, or you would have to go down into the individual levels and look for those indicators. So that is notes. All right, I didn't see any questions. All right, I'm just going to keep going because I don't see any questions, but please feel free to stop me if you do have questions or if I'm going too fast. Because I have been known to talk very fast. All right. So I discussed some of the sort of basic ways that you input data into cells. Now I'm going to talk about a little bit more, not necessarily complicated, but a little bit more robust and sort of interesting ways to input data. So I'm going to talk about splits, adding splits to cells and budgeting by activities, and also do some basic formulas in cells. Before I go into that, I just want to say a quick note about enrollment input. As I mentioned before, your enrollment has a white background, which means that it is editable. You should see some initial like pre-populated data that we put in here for you guys, which should match up with your targets. However, you guys might know more information about like the grade level split than we do. So this is why those cells are editable. If you do decide to edit these cells, just a couple quick things that you should note. The first is that you can only input enrollment and update it at the general level. So you will only see the white background for enrollment at the general level. And I'll show you what it looks like at the individual grade levels. If you do change the numbers, please make sure that you input the same number across all of the months. So again, to do that, you would just input the data, right-click, and copy forward to end. We want all these numbers to be the same across the month. And the number that you enter should be the enrollment that you expect in October of 2013. It should be like your butts and seats number. We budget separately for intra-year attrition, and we need like a solid, butts and seats number to base that calculation off of. So I'm going to go ahead and save this change that I just made, and let me show you what this looks like now on the individual grade levels. So I inputted all my enrollment, say I wanted to change some stuff. I made all those changes. Now if I want to go and budget on the elementary K level, I'll still see enrollment up here. I'm only going to see my kindergarten enrollment because we're only at the elementary K level, and now it's read-only. So I can't actually edit it here. I can only edit it at the general level. And you also notice that there's a little triangle here. And this formula is basically going and grabbing that number that we just input at the elementary general level. So again, just enrollment is only editable at the general level, but you will see it on the individual grade levels, but it will be read-only. Okay, cool. So that's enrollment. Let's talk about adding splits and activities. This is something that I think is really cool. A split is essentially a means of adding like multiple lines within the same account, and they're also used to budget by activity and basically just enter additional detail or supporting calculations within an account. So let me just run through an example to explain what that means. Let's say that I am an elementary school DOO, and my elementary school folks or kids get to go on an out-of-state field lesson. It's a totally made-up example because we don't have that, but let's say we did. Field lessons are a really good example because there's a lot of different expenses that go into field lessons, right? Like you have your hotels, you have your flights, like food, whatever. So I'm going to go to, I want to budget for my first graders going on their out-of-state field lessons. So I'm going to go to the elementary 1 level, and I'm going to scroll down to the account that I want to input this data in. So that's going to be out-of-state field lessons. And I'm going to budget it over here in like the last quarter of data because that's when we're going to take our trip. Let's see. So the items that I want to budget in here are airfare, hotels, and food. So I'm going to click in the month of March for this row. I'm going to right-click and select Add Split, and you will see a new window pop up. I'm going to name the split airfare to the North Pole, which doesn't exist. And I'm also going to give it an activity, which would be travel. Select OK, and you'll see that it adds this separate line underneath the out-of-state field lessons account code. You'll see the activity on the far left, and then the data. So my data here is going to be, let's say, $5,000 for airfare. I also want to add another split for hotels. So I'm going to right-click again, select Add Split. This I'm going to call Hotels in the North Pole. The activity is going to be lodging. Select OK. And our airfare is going to be paid for in March, but our hotels are actually going to come through in April. So let's say that's $1,500. And then the last thing I'm going to add is food, because we got to feed the kids. Assign the activity of food, how fitting. And this is going to be, let's say, $500. Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to save this work right away. Save. Yes, no. Oh, it's working. Come on, Adaptive, you can do it. There we go. Okay, so now I see this data all split out. You see that it's a little bit, the order is a little bit different. It's going to automatically order in sort of numerical order by activity. Unfortunately, that's something that you can't change, something that we kind of have to live with. But I can collapse this, and I see that for out-of-state field lessons, we budgeted $5,000 in March and $2,000 in April, but there's some things that make that up, right? So if I expand this, then I see what makes it up. So I think that this could be really cool for accounts like field lessons or maybe consultants or something like that, where you have like multiple things that flow up into that account, and you want to separate them out on the budget level. The cool thing about this is that you can drill down into this level of detail, both from like the roll-up level and also from your reports. So let me just show you an example of that really quickly. I'm just going to go up here, back up here to the roll-up level, which is where I'm going to be reviewing my budget. Here again, we see that there's 5,000 and 2,000 for out-of-state field lessons in March and April, respectively. But I want to see what actually makes this number up. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click, click Explore Cell. The first thing I'm going to see is the level breakdown. So I see that this entire 2,000 is sitting in the elementary 1 level. So I'm going to click on that. And now I see what these splits are. So I see that there's, $1,500 for hotels and $500 for food, which is exactly what we just did. I think that this will be useful when you're reviewing your budgets, but also like during the year, because if you're looking at this stuff a year from now, we always get a lot of questions about like, what did we budget for there again? Like if you input that data now, you'll be able to see, what your original budget was. So splits are really cool. I think you guys should utilize them to the fullest as much as you can. Let's see. Any questions about splits right now? All right. The last sort of piece about data input that I want to discuss is formulas. And we're just going to do a very basic formula based on a cost that is driven by enrollment. So let's go ahead and go back to that elementary 1 level. And remember that I budgeted for food here. So say we know about how much we're going to spend per kid on food. Instead of just putting $500 here, I can make this a formula and make it a little bit more dynamic. So let's say it's like $50 a kid. Again, as I mentioned, these sheets behave very, very similar to Excel spreadsheets. So I'm just going to click in the cell, type equals. I'm going to scroll up to where my enrollment is. Click in that cell. Oh no, hold on a second. Let me try that again. Equals. No, it's not working. Sorry, technical difficulties. Let's do this again. Equals. There we go. Okay, so I hit equals. It might be best to zero out the account first. Hit equals, and then click right in that enrollment cell. You'll see that in the formula box, a little thing pops up that says you just grab this account. And then I'm just going to say like times 50, because that's about how much we're going to spend per kid. You can either hit enter at this point or click this little green box here. We'll scroll back down to where I input that formula. And you'll notice that there's a little FX question mark here. As long as this is blue, that's a good thing. If this is red, that means that there's an invalid formula. But this is basically just saying there's a formula in here, and I need you to save this sheet to actually evaluate it. So I'm going to go ahead and save the sheet. And there we go. So it's actually $5,000 if we did budget $50 a kid. And again, you see the little purple triangle, which means there's a formula in this cell. So that's just a basic formula that you can use based on enrollment. So I think field lessons, maybe uniforms or something like that could be based on enrollment. But you could also do the same thing with headcount if you wanted to budget your professional development or office supplies based on your headcount. And it would be the same thing. You would just click on equals, click up here on your headcount, and then multiply it by whatever the value is. So this is where you might. I mentioned that locals tab back on the overview sheet where you can input sort of like program-specific assumptions. If we wanted to make this 50 an assumption for our school, we would do that using the local tab so that this would be a completely dynamic formula and we wouldn't have to go in and change this 50 if we wanted to change the amount here. So if that's something that I think as you're going through this stuff and you're finding that you are inputting numbers a lot and you're using formulas a lot, that is an indication that you might want to build some local assumptions using the local tab. and that means that you just send a note to Jen or call her, and she can help you do that. Okay, cool. So that's all data input stuff. Let's see. We have a quick question from Matt. Do you have to save the sheet in order to see the sum for the equation? That is yes. And we saw that demonstrated here. So anytime you type in a formula, I'll just reiterate, you have to save your sheet in order to see where that, how that formula is evaluated. That also goes for, like, if I just typed in a number here, like you'll see that this blue, you know, takes into account the 5,000 that I just entered. So you do see that sum, but I still recommend that you save your data before you look at the totals, just to make sure that there's no like formulas or anything else hidden down there. Definitely save your work often. You can't save it enough, for sure. Okay, cool. All right, so that's data input, and that is basically the non-personnel discretionary sheet. I'm going to move on to the budget input tech assumption sheet, and I'm trying to be a little bit mindful of the time. So again, non-personnel is where most of your non-discretionary or non-personnel discretionary stuff is going to take place. If you have noticed, all the tech accounts here are read-only, and that is because those are driven from the tech assumption sheet. So let's just go ahead and take a look at that. If you click on that, I'm just going to go up to the roll-up level at this point. And if you guys are following along with me, you will see all of a lot more data here. We have preloaded tech assumptions that was given to us by Lauren and Ed into this sheet. So you will see all that data in here. And again, this is just some dummy data that we have for demoing purposes right now. My recommendation when you're looking at this sheet is to look at it from the roll-up level. And this way you can see, you'll see this level column over here, and you'll see, you know, how things are broken down by grade if they are. For now, when we pre-populated this stuff, everything should be at the general level, but if you did want to add a row or assign a specific item to a level, you could do that from here. If you were to only go into one of the lower levels, that level column is going to disappear, and you'll only see the data from that level. So my recommendation is to just stay at the roll-up level so that you can see everything that is in your school. So I'm just going to run through these columns pretty quickly because they're pretty self-explanatory. Let's see. So the first column is the level. Again, you have a little drop down here, and you can assign things to different levels. Again, please don't assign anything to this roll-up level, the KIPP NYC or the one that begins with KIPP. The next column is discretionary. This will default to discretionary. GL account, there's a drop down here showing all of your tech accounts, item, and description. For the preloaded items or rows here, please don't change the item or description names. E-rate eligible is something that the tech team will take care of, so you don't have to worry about that one. Units, unit or annual cost. If something is based on an annual cost, just input 1 for the units, don't input 0. You have to input at least 1 for this total cost column to actually make sense. This is just a formula, and it's read-only. Purchase start month and purchase end month is something that we added this year to allow you to add some seasonality to your tech purchases, because most of this stuff is front-loaded at the beginning of the year. So if you see something that has a start month and an end month that's both July, that basically means that this entire amount is going to show up in your budget in the month of July. Similarly, if you see something that's spread out across multiple months, say August through October, that means that this amount is going to be spread out equally between those months. And it's just a way, again, to add seasonality to your budget so that you know when you can expect certain expenses. Projected E-rate revenue, again, is something that the tech team will take care of, so you don't have to worry about that column. Projected net cost is read-only, and then there's a tech notes column here, which is basically a way for basically you and the tech team to communicate via this spreadsheet. So you can write a note here to the tech team if you want to. Unlike the notes that we talked about before when you're adding a note to a cell, these notes do not follow the data, the actual numerical data for the tech accounts. These tech notes in this column only live in this sheet. So that's just a quick sort of point of information. So if I wanted to go in and add a row, I could either right-click on this sheet and select Add Row. Again, please make sure that you don't assign anything to the roll-up level. It's going to default to that if you're at that level. But go ahead and change that, pick which GL account, input an item, description, etc. Two more things I want to say about the sheet. If, for all the preloaded items, if you want to get rid of a particular row or not have anything for that row, just type in 0 in the units instead of deleting the row. We want to still keep that information there. So please don't ever delete a row. Just type in 0 for the units, and that cost will disappear. Yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say on this sheet. I think it's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. The data that you see in there right now should be, according to the tech team, that's like your wish list. So I imagine that some of that will need to be cut down a little bit. But that's what they gave us to upload. So that's sort of just our starting point to go with. And then again, all of this data is going to flow back into your non-personnel discretionary sheet and those read-only tech accounts. Okay, in the last 10 minutes, I want to talk about how you will review your budget. So let's say I'm all done with inputting my data. I've updated my tech stuff. I've updated like my personnel stuff, my discretionary stipends, and now I want to see what it all boils down to. There's basically two venues that you can sort of do that in. So one is in a sheet, and then the other way is in a report. So the advantages of reviewing your data in a sheet is that you can see the data by month, and you can also change it on the spot. Some of the advantages of doing it in a report, which we'll see how this all plays out, is reports are a little bit easier on the eyes, but you have to go back into a sheet to change anything. However, the drill down functionality and the explore functionality are the same whether you're in a sheet or report, and we're going to demonstrate some of that now. So I'm going to go back to my non-personnel discretionary sheet. And if I'm reviewing my budget, I want to be at the roll-up level, which is the one that begins with KIP. And we're already there, which is great. So here I can see everything by month. At this roll-up level, you're going to see a few more rows under the per pupil calculations. I'll just talk about what each of these things means really quickly. So adjusted discretionary cost total is essentially your sort of aggregate discretionary expenses minus your discretionary revenue and including any adjustments that you see here. So this is basically we're spending $77,000 total in discretionary costs. The next row is just that cost on a per pupil basis. The next row, net discretionary allotment, is your discretionary target. And again, if you have an expansion allotment or any other adjustments, those will already be embedded into here. So this is the number that you are shooting for. And then the last two just are comparisons to that number on a per pupil basis and then on a total basis. So if I am the principal or DOO of KIP Washington Heights Academy Elementary School and I'm looking at this overview sheet, I basically see that we're under our KIP contribution by almost $1,300 per pupil, which translates into an additional $510,000 that I need to go spend. So that's sort of a review of that section. Let me show you just a little bit of the drill down functionality. We talked about this a little bit already. I'm going to go up to this office supplies number here again. So let's say I want to drill down into this particular value. I'm going to right-click, select Explore Cell. If there are individual values in different grade levels, I'll be able to see that. I'm going to drill down into the elementary general level. And again, remember we saw this note before. One extra thing that I want to tell you about is this View Audit Trail sort of button here. So this is a way that you can see all the changes that have been made to this cell throughout the course of this budgeting cycle. So as you can see, there have been a lot of changes made to this particular cell as Prisma and I have been testing out this stuff. And this will show you the old value, the new value, and who changed it and when. So this is a really good way to see, like, I'm sure you guys are going to be making a lot of different changes to your budget, and this is a really good way to track, when things change and, maybe why they changed if you added a note, so that you can just have a good sense of that stuff. So that's the drill down functionality within a sheet when you're reviewing your budget. The next thing I want to show is reviewing your budget in reports. So we're going to go to the reports tab. And again, instead of just clicking on this tab, I'm going to hold down Control and then click on the tab, and it'll bring it up in a different browser tab. Usually when I'm working in adaptive planning, I have at least like 5 different tabs open so that I can just navigate quickly between them. And I would recommend that you guys do the same. So we've created 3 different budget reports right now for you guys. They're in the Shared Reports folder under FY14 Budget Reports. If you guys navigate here, you should all see 3 different reports. DOOs will see this personnel detail report, but if they click on it, they won't actually have access to that data. I'll just do that right now, and it'll say, you don't have permission to run this report. Principals, on the other hand, will be able to see that data. The 2 that I want to talk about right now, though, are budget by level and budget versus prior years. So let's go ahead and click on budget by level. And here you can see, you're looking at the same data that we were just looking at. It's just in a different format. So on the left-hand column is your total school data. Again, the structure along the left-hand side is exactly the same as your SOAs and exactly the same as what was in the sheet that we just looked at. But here you can also see your individual grade levels all in one sheet, or all in one screen. So before, when we were doing this on a sheet, we had to drill into each individual level to see this data. But here, you see the rolled up version all on the same screen. So it just depends on how you want to look at the data. One quick comment on this last column here, the no assigned level. This is really only for calculation purposes that we're using this column for. And the only data that you will see here is enrollment data, and then at the very bottom, some data in the per pupil target calculations. If you have input data at the roll-up level, which we have talked about that we shouldn't do, you will see that show up in this column. And if you do see some data in here that is an expense, you need to go back and put that into either general or one of your individual grade or team levels. So that's just something to check as you're reviewing this report. Again, the drill down functionality is the exact same as it was in the report. So if we go into paper, instead of right-clicking, we're just going to left-click. You'll see this extra screen. This time it's going to break it down by time periods first. And if you can continue to drill until you can drill no more, you can look at the audit trail, and you'll see that these are the changes that were made. So the drill down functionality is the exact same in the report as it was in the sheet. It just depends on how you want to look at the data. The last report I'm going to show is the budget by level report, or budget versus prior years. And this one is basically the exact same data. It just shows you prior year data, and you do not see the grade level detail. You just see the rolled up version. So again, different ways of viewing the exact same data. If you did want to see individual grade level stuff, you could click up here in the drop down and select whichever one you wanted to show. Okay, so that's reports. That's how you would view your summarized budget and see how you're doing versus your discretionary per pupil, as well as drilling down into individual detail. Those are the things that we wanted to cover today, and we did. I'm just going to unmute really quickly and see if anyone has any questions, any last-minute questions, or anything that was unclear. We have 3 extra minutes, so that's great. I definitely believe in starting on time and ending on time. So if there are any questions, I'll take them now. And if not, we're here for questions as you guys work through this stuff. So any questions? All right. Okay, cool. Well, that was all that I wanted to cover today. I'll just put some reminders up here on the screen. The memory jogger document that we sent out just sort of walks through all the different categories of discretionary expenses and has some questions to jog your memory about things that you might want to budget there. The next set of webinars that we're doing will be scheduled for after break, and those are going to focus on personnel inputs, workflow, aka budget submission, and any other sort of remaining items or anything that has come up as you guys have been working through this. And then, most importantly, the final budget deadline is April 19th. And by final budget deadline, we mean that your budget should be approved by your principals, managing directors, superintendent, and submitted to finance by April 19th. All right. So I think that's it. I'm going to let you guys go, unless anybody has anything else. We've been recording this webinar, so feel free to come back to it. I'll post it on adaptive planning in the report section, or a link to it. And feel free to come back to this as you guys are working through things. And again, feel free to send any questions my and Charisma's way. So thank you guys for your time. Have a great Wednesday evening and a great break if I don't see you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, guys. All right.